really fear that they made a terrible mistake. In the absence of an effective vaccine, or any vaccine at all, for SARS-CoV-2, and that's the virus, the technical name for the virus, I've taken to calling it the Wuhan virus, or you could call it the CCP virus, since the Chinese Communist Party plays a major role in the spread of this virus. At least we can say that. In any case, the authorities have prevented the population from developing widespread immunity to the virus, what we call herd immunity or herd protection, by doing this lockdown. And I'm going to give you some statistics on that, which means that when this comes back around the planet again, if it ever diminishes, and there is signs that it is diminishing, it means that that we're going to be facing the same situation. In other words, SARS-CoV-2 is now part of the seasonal mix. And that means the situation experienced this spring will be re-experienced in the future. And if we had to have a lockdown on account of the virus this time, that is, if the lockdown was necessary, then we will have to have a lockdown next time. But I don't think we will. And we can get back to the reasons why I don't think we will in a moment. But if we don't, it will certainly suggest that the lockdown was unnecessary. But more than that, it will suggest that the whole exercise is counterproductive to the ends of reducing future outbreaks of the virus, since we will not have achieved herd immunity. So I want to begin by talking about that. I think a lot of hope is being placed on finding an effective vaccine in record time. So we don't know when that vaccine will appear. We don't know how effective it will be. But we know that in the absence of a vaccine, we need to have herd immunity through the way it's worked for millennia. That is, significant proportion of the population gets herd immunity. Well, what is herd immunity? You've probably heard that term before and wondered what it meant, or probably many of you already know what it means. But for those who don't, when an infectious agent enters a population and that population has no immunity to the pathogen, it spreads very quickly. One person can infect many people, and then each newly infected person infects more people, and so on. And this is called community spread. If a sizable proportion of the population is immune to the pathogen, then that means there's a limited number of spreaders, and that will limit the spread. So you can slow the spread down through acquiring greater degrees of immunity. For example, if 80% of a population is immune to a virus, only 1 out of every 5 persons may contract and spread the virus. And exposure doesn't necessarily mean infection, but just assuming that everybody was infected. Without 100% of the population enjoying immunity from the agent, some persons may still contract and spread the virus. But 80% herd immunity means fewer outbreaks of the virus, and the virus may be effectively contained. It's generally accepted that between 70 and 90% is a high degree of herd immunity. Okay, so you'd like to get 70, 90% of the people to have antibodies and an effective immune response to the virus. There are 2 ways to achieve this, as I suggested at the outset. The first way is to contract the virus and survive it. This is the way, as I said, this has been going on for millennia. The second way, by the way, the first way, of course, assumes that you have a large enough number of persons who get the virus and survive. So viruses which are especially lethal don't do very well, actually, because they kill their host before they have a chance to spread the virus. So successful viruses depend on most people surviving. So the second way, of course, is through an effective vaccine. And for example, if you look at seasonal flu vaccines, the efficacy is running around 35-40%. According to the CDC, you also find that independent studies of vaccine efficacy have lower numbers than that. So the industry, I'm just going with the industry funded studies here. So at the same time, you have a certain proportion of the population that has some degree of immunity from acquiring the whatever flu came through in previous seasons. The flu is still widespread. It affects millions of people annually, and there's different types and strains. And I talk about this on my blog. I talk about the different rhinovirus strains, influenza strains, coronavirus strains, and so forth. And a lot of people die from the flu every year. Tens of thousands in the United States die from the flu. But if you have around 35 to 40% herd immunity from the vaccine, if you add another 35-40% from immunity acquired naturally from having the flu, then you would get herd immunity, and the flu wouldn't spread very effectively. And I'll talk about a comparison for that. That's a very clearly, because millions of people still get the flu. We haven't really achieved this level of herd immunity that would prevent the detrimental mass effects of the virus, right? So we haven't mitigated the flu the way we've mitigated some other viruses. So what are those other viruses? Well, we have to make a distinction between two types of viruses. There's DNA viruses, such as chickenpox or varicella, and that mutates slowly, and one acquires a lifetime immunity after contracting. I mean, most people do, and surviving the DNA virus invasion in the body, and you develop antibodies to it. And then when chickenpox circulates through the population again, as you get older, your immune response is constantly boosted by younger people getting that virus. In influenza, coronaviruses, rhinoviruses, those are RNA viruses, and they mutate more rapidly. And so exposure provides on time-limited protection. Not all RNA viruses mutate as quickly as others. Exposure to any strain may provide some protection to the mutants of that strain. And this is why the flu vaccine has limited efficacy in providing herd immunity. And in fact, it becomes less effective over time as the virus, the influenza virus, mutates. But if you acquire herd immunity by contracting the virus, a significant proportion of the population contracting the virus, this does have some lasting effects. So if you take the Hong Kong flu, something that I've written about on my blog, that's influenza A, H3N2. It's actually one of the dominant strains in the current flu season. It comes around every year. Well, it had the most devastating impact in the 1968-69 flu season. It killed possibly 100,000 people in the United States. It was very devastating. Many of us lived through that virus. I was born in 1962. It's quite likely then, when I was 8 years old, or 6 years old, 7 years old, that I would have contracted that virus and people around me. And so now it continues to circulate without these devastating effects, because a substantial amount of immunity, herd protection has been established. But also, while we may get that flu, our body, our immune system recognizes it to some extent. All right, and so it's less severe. Excuse me. Start talking about flus and viruses and so forth, and my throat tickles. I have allergies anyway. And of course, re-exposure to the virus boosts our immune response. So every time, if you've had H3N2, then when it comes back around, you're re-exposed to it, your body says, "Oh, there it is," it recognizes the signature of the virus. And so that brings us to the problem. Sort of giving you that quick explanation. That brings us to this problem of the response of governments to SARS, COVID-2. Let me just give you the numbers. The world population is 7.8 billion. And the number of confirmed cases of the virus, and I checked this a couple of days ago, and I could bring you the latest numbers, but it's not going to change the percentages. So this was a couple of days ago that I looked at the numbers. The confirmed cases of the virus, 1.9 million. Of those confirmed cases, 121,987 have died. So you have to subtract that out. So you have roughly 1.8 million who, if they all survive, many of them are still sick, if they all survive, they will have possible immunity to this virus. That's 0.023% of the world population. If you take the United States, right? So I was talking about the world population. Those are world numbers. The United States, and we've been hit harder by this virus than most countries, although not as hard as some countries. People will tell you that deaths in the United States have surpassed those of Italy, but understand Italy's about 1/6 the size of the United States. So proportionally speaking, we haven't been hit the hardest, but we've been hit hard by this for reasons we can get into. We have 328 million people approximately. We had a couple days ago 463,820 confirmed cases. And if you subtract out the deaths, the percent with possible immunity, if they survive, those who are sick or who have been sick, those who are sick now and they survive, is 0.17%. All right, now that's far below the levels that we need to manage future outbreaks of COVID-19. If we need somewhere in the 70 to 90% range, and then even less, of course, that make it less significant. So we might settle for 50 or 60%, or you maybe 40 or 50% like what it appears to be for influenza. Then millions will get sick, thousands will die, right? But it won't be a calamity. Now, that's assuming the worst of the current situation, that COVID. And of course, we've already had some 26 to 30,000 influenza deaths in the United States already this year. So the COVID deaths come on top of that. And there's some problems with the deaths that are attributed to the COVID-19 disease. Since now we know, and when we pointed this out, that they were inflating the numbers by counting people who had not tested, who had, were not confirmed cases, but they were counting them anyway because they had flu-like symptoms. And people pushed back and said that's a conspiracy theory. Now the media is reporting that's in fact what they've done. So the numbers have grown rather rapidly. We were reaching a plateau, and now they're growing rapidly because they're throwing in cases that have not been confirmed cases. The flu deaths are estimates, but those are done on an epidemiological model, which for some reason is not being applied in this case. And which brings me, I can get to this whole problem with how we need to actually think about this. So, for example, we know that most people who get the SARS-CoV-2 virus are asymptomatic. They're exposed, they produce antibodies, but they don't develop the disease, COVID-19, or they only have mild symptoms. The evidence suggests that this accounts for about 8 out of every 10 persons who is asymptomatic or have mild symptoms. And most of these persons are not tested. And moreover, there are people who have severe symptoms. I had a few weeks back a flu-like illness that fits the description of COVID-19. I didn't go get tested. I didn't want to expose anybody if I had it by going to a hospital, or I didn't want to be exposed to it by going to a hospital to any pathogens, particularly if I'm struggling through a flu-like illness. And so I sweated it out. And I have various strategies that I use to get through flu-like illnesses. In any case, so you have those who have flu-like illnesses. They're not tested. They recover without medical intervention. I'm one case, and I've spoken with many other people who have very similar stories to tell. So let's be very conservative in our estimate and suppose that there's 10 times the number of confirmed cases in the population who become infected by the virus, infected by the pathogen, and acquire immunity. Now, that's a pretty low number, a very conservative number. When you calculate the epidemiological models that look at, that estimate the total number of people who have the flu, it's many, many more times than that than are the confirmed cases. In fact, I looked at one CDC year, and it was 700 times the estimated number than the actual positive cases. So if we take this very conservative number of 10 times, that takes us to 1.17% herd immunity. That's far, far below what's needed to prevent the future outbreaks of COVID-19, but really even to limit the amount. So the lockdown will have permitted the achievement of anything close to a desirable level of herd immunity. It seems to me that the smart thing that we could have done would be to identify those who are at special risk of the virus, the elderly, those with compromised immune systems, those with type 2, uncontrolled type 2 diabetes, those with high blood pressure, and so forth. Protect them. Throw all our money into protecting them, and then let this thing burn through the population. We'd have a whole generation of young people who would be exposed to this virus. So when it comes back around next year, they will have an immunity for it. And those are the spreaders. I mean, kids, and most of them aren't going to have very mild symptoms, cold-like symptoms, or they'll have no symptoms at all, and they'll be spreading it throughout. And so if you want to protect the elderly and children who want to see their grandparents, and you want to protect them, the best thing is for the children to have an immunity to this virus so that they don't expose people who are vulnerable. Then that would have relegated the virus to the common viral mix, that human populations endure every year without calamity, not without death. Death comes with these, but without calamity.